last chance to impress for some on the roster bubble, and maybe another chance to impress even a little bit for the starters on this Bills roster as we go into the final week of the preseason. I'm Kevin Carroll. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone Podcast.
And I'm Jon Scott. It's kind of weird having you back, Kevin. I think I really liked the solo pod I did after the Pittsburgh performance. I actually brought my A game, contrary to what the Bills did in the Steel City.
Didn't watch either. I'm just kidding. I did. The look on your face is great. Yeah, John, sometimes you got to pull the load by yourself, and that's what you had to do during the preseason. I had previous obligations, but here we are back together in studio once again as we prepare for, again, the final week of the preseason. And again, the hot topic is your buddy Josh Allen and the rest of the starters are going to have to play again. And head coach Sean McDermott not really saying how long, John, but my first question to you is, put your coaching hat on. Why do you think they're starting this final preseason game?
Well, just to be clear, I asked Sean McDermott after he announced that the starters would play, and after Sean said he wouldn't get into how long they'll play, I was curious how much his decision to play them in the third preseason game was because of what he saw them play in the second preseason game, some of which, like Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, it was their first action of the preseason. He said, I just feel this is what's best for our team. He wasn't going to get into the specifics, but I'll be honest with you, Kevin, 100% it has to do a lot with what he saw from the collective starters, offense, defense, and even special teams in Pittsburgh, because I think Josh Allen played fine. So I don't have a problem. I would have been fine with Josh doesn't play. But let's get everyone else. But maybe just the cohesion of the offensive unit and then defense and everything. You just want everyone to get out there because they did not look in sync. They looked out of sorts. There was a calamity of errors. And maybe Sean just feels we made strides maybe in practice this week, but I got to see it in game action, even if it's for just a series.
Mentally, it didn't look to me like they were where they needed to be with one more preseason game to go before the regular season kicks off against the Jets, John. Mentally, it was a mess. Execution-wise, it looked a mess on both offense and defense early. I thought the defense kind of came around after the big chunk touchdown play. But, I mean, it even bled to special teams in that game. And I think you're right. I think if you look at what the product was that they put on the field as a team that, while they're not the chic team they were a year ago, they're still a team that a lot of people think are going to be good. You and I were there all during training camp. You've been there for the last few practices. Everything looks right. But then you put that product on the field, and that looked like hot garbage the entire time for the offense. And you even had Josh Allen scrambling around like a rookie where, you know, the play just broke down and Josh Allen's going to Josh Allen and try to keep the play going. But it just looked like a mess from the start.
So the question that everyone was asking, even us to the players and the players probably to themselves, the coaching staff and fans alike and everything, is how do you truly evaluate what you just saw? Mm-hmm. It's preseason. We know what preseason is, but at the same time, that was bad. That was bad. So how much do you weigh, oh, they're rusty, which I don't weigh that at all. Or whatever. I mean, what do you put into the equation to say whether you think it matters or it doesn't matter that they played like crap? What do you do? Because I already said it on my solo podcast after the game.
I mean, I think there's just that giant difference between the execution you get during practice and going up against another team. I think that's why a lot of teams do still have joint practices, even though those can get kind of hairy here and there. So I just think we're in a new spot. I think Sean McDermott said this to you earlier, that each preseason is different, and this is the path that they need to take. And it looks like a lot of other teams with the 3 preseason games now, no longer 4, are just approaching things different and trying things differently. And you put that out there, and yeah, I was expecting that the starters were going to start again this week, but if you get Josh Allen and the guys out there and they go bing, bang, boom down the field, touchdown, Josh Allen's probably out. Stephon Diggs is out. They'll keep some of the starters in and start weaving players in on both offense and defense. I think we'll see that for sure if things go well. But it almost looked to me like you just want something down on film to say, this is our offense, this is what we got.
Yeah, it's fair. I agree with you. I think unless things are just terrible, like a 3-and-out or something, I think the offense and these starters in general, both sides of the ball, it's going to be a short
You go drive down, kick a 20-yard field goal, that's it.
I mean, even if they go get a couple first downs or something, or you get a stop or whatever it may be, even if you allow a touchdown, I think maybe if it's not some 62-yard run or first play of the series, things like that. It's a weird dynamic here, but I agree. I think coming out of the Pittsburgh game, this is what I expected. But I do think that I saw enough from Josh Allen, and he's obviously the most important person for this team's season. So to that effect, I probably would have been good with Kyle Allen. But, of course, maybe part of Josh Allen playing and maybe some of his playing time will be dictated because as of right now, they only have 2 healthy quarterbacks, one of which is Josh Allen, the other is Kyle.
I was going to say Matt Barkley's injured. Does that play a role, or do you think Josh just accomplishes what he needs to accomplish? Now we get the whole rest of the game with Kyle Allen to see what you have in Kyle Allen, because the first game wasn't impressive, and then the game in Pittsburgh wasn't impressive by anyone.
I actually think Kyle Allen was one of the bright spots. I mean, he's 12 of 15, 112, a touchdown. The offense actually executed and found the end zone and got points with Kyle Allen under center. And he did it against the third team, but everything we raved about Matt Barkley the week before came against the third team.
Fair enough. That's fair enough.
So I think that Kyle Allen did what he needed to do in his position, and I know we'll get into position battles and whatnot. I'll just check this one off the rundown. Even if Matt Barkley was healthy, the backup quarterback competition was over after Pittsburgh. It was Kyle Allen showing, all right, that was fine. And Matt Barkley did some good things. He moved the ball down the football field. But I think Kyle Allen showed enough to make you say, yeah, we're gonna stick with plan A, which was signing him in the offseason and then making him Josh Allen's backup.
What do you think we need to see from the the position battles, the big ones, cornerback 2, middle linebacker and stuff on the defense is something big. How much do we really need to see from guys like Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde? See, I don't think those guys even need to be involved, but if you're going to play your starters, you're playing your starters.
Same thing. Give me a series. Just execute. Make the run fits. Don't give up a big play. That's really all it is. There's not a lot that I think you need to see because, again, there's also parts of this of Sean McDermott isn't dialing up the defense like he's going to dial it up week 1 against the Jets and throughout the regular season. So if we're talking about executing the scheme, I think it's more just fundamentally do your job. Like, find your gap, maintain your assignment, whether the play is more vanilla than you'll see down the line. And maybe I think, especially on that long run by Jaylen Warren, I think on a couple levels there, people just didn't do their job.
I'm going to ask you a question off the top of my head. This is just something that popped into my head throughout 2 preseason games. Do Poyer and Hyde look like they're a step slower, a step behind to you? Because at times they have to me, and I'm not saying they need to be replaced or someone should start over them, but it looks to me on certain plays like maybe they're one step slower than we've seen in the past.
I'm not going to go to that place right now. This is why the market probably wasn't as high for Jordan Poyer in the offseason. It's why maybe the market, should the Bills not work something out with Micah Hyde, may not be very large or expensive for Micah Hyde following this season, because you hit the low 30s. Everyone is looked at differently, because at some point you are going to decline regardless of how great you are as a player. I'm not there yet with these guys. I've seen some things in the practice setting where they've been in great position. I thought Jordan Poyer, especially at Fisher, was flying around. He looked great. There were moments where Micah Hyde made great plays on the ball as well. So I'm not going to get there yet. But I do think that it's something that maybe, as I've said before with other things, you had the antenna up a little bit of, they're both coming off seasons where Micah obviously is coming off the neck injury. Jordan was banged up in all sorts of ways throughout the season. They're also in their mid-30s. At some point, just it could happen, and maybe is this the time that they've been synced for so long with the Bills?
Right.
Could it potentially happen for both of them at the same time?
Trust me, the body tends to break down the older you get. Trust me when I tell you that, John. The big battle, cornerback 2, opposite Tre'Davious White, is, of course, Dane Jackson, the veteran, blah, blah, blah. We'll go through it. You sat down with Kyer Elam this week. Big feature piece that's running on our air on Spectrum News 1. Interesting to hear Elam's take on what he's gone through after being a first-round draft pick, to battling and losing to Christian Benford last year, to now being in this battle again with Christian Benford and Dane Jackson once again in a place where he had never been before. He had been the alpha, the main guy, the guy who was always starting since he was young, and now you get to the NFL and players run into this, and just a really interesting piece to hear what he had to say.
He's such a great kid. I mean, he's a kid still. He's such a great kid to talk to, because the level of honesty and articulation with him for his age and experience is phenomenal. Maybe that's because he comes from an NFL background with his family and things like that. But when I spoke to him a year ago, even when things weren't going great, he was very poignant about his responses, and he was very open and honest with me this week about everything from a year ago. He was open and honest, to your point. It was the first time he started playing football in 8th grade. Ever since maybe the early onset of that year, he has been one of the best, if not the best, players on his football team, and that includes being at Florida. And then at last year, he was not. I mean, shoot, the guy was in a rotation at best. There was other times he either was not even getting into the game or was just straight out inactive. And that maintained. And then lo and behold, we come through this year, it's the same thing. One thing that stood out to me, a couple things, were, one, you oftentimes ask first-round draft picks about pressure. Do you feel the pressure? And nearly every single one of them will tell you no.
Right.
And every one of them is full of you-know-what. Because that's the case. Now, maybe if you're Dalton Kincaid, you don't feel the pressure because you're coming in and everything's rolling for you. But Kyer said whenever he didn't make a play, he felt the pressure as the first-round pick that he's letting down Brandon Beane, that he's letting down Sean McDermott, that he's letting down his family, and he's letting down himself. And that builds, and builds because he wants to make a play. If Christian Benford makes a play, if Dane Jackson makes a play, if somebody else makes a play, well, he wants to make a bigger play. And that's a tough world to live in. And then another thing was, he says he's not going to use it as an excuse and never would, but admitted the severe challenges and learning curve of going from a press man corner at Florida to a zone-heavy scheme with the Bills. He said he would stay up late multiple nights trying to figure out how to make plays in his zone scheme. He feels now he's done that. He's put it on tape. It's now about consistency. But that was a big transition for him. And even if he was playing the same type of coverage as he was, it would be an adjustment. But it's been a very challenging path early for Kyer Elam, and he's not shying away from it. But he did say, I now have gone away from social media, And I'm learning to
Good.
I'm learning to block out the negativity, only focus in on myself. And he also said, I need to embrace the small wins. Not everything has to be feast or famine here. If you did something well, and maybe it was an interception like in a playoff game or in the Kansas City game, take those, because it's not going to be that way. He admitted both preseason games, he's made some mistakes. The pass interference, he's like, I was in position. I don't know why I got the pass interference call. Why did I grab him? And then in Pittsburgh, he's like, there's just situational things where I got beat, and I just should know better. He's very honest about it. And, Kevin, the question now is what do they do with him? Because I truly think the cornerback 2's position right now is between Dane Jackson, probably with a pretty good lead, and Christian Benford. And I don't think Kyrie's in that mix. And as we discussed before going into training camp, if this scenario played out, what do they do with Kyrie Elam?
Now, you talked, and you've brought this up before, that is it possible that if you have Dane Jackson, which I agree with you 100%, what we've seen this summer and through 2 preseason games, Dane Jackson is the starter at the New York Jets on Monday Night Football to start the season. Christian Benford behind him, and you had brought up, is it unrealistic to move on from Kyrie Elam and see what you can get for him? And are you still at that with him at this point?
100%. And I think it would be great for him. And I think in this scenario, as we get down this list of things to talk about going into the final preseason game, there are some positions of need that the Bills have, and I don't think it's necessarily draft pick. Maybe it's a player for player. I think I heard some people have mentioned Kelvin Shepard for Jerry Hughes. Was that Kelvin Shepard, right?
Yeah, from the Colts?
Yes.
Yeah.
A player for player type trade. And it's, all right, this team is maybe looking to move on from a tackle, or this team is looking to move on from a linebacker.
Or need a middle linebacker.
Well, yeah, the team is looking to move on from a linebacker.
Oh, yeah. I got you.
The Bills have this first-round pick who has shown in games that he can make some plays, but maybe schematically it just is never going to work. And let's just kind of do a swap. Maybe that's what's on the table. And I think, and I mentioned Elam, and there was other guys, but Elam was at the top of the list going into camp. And I think it's played out this way. And I think if they can, that is something that could benefit both sides. 3, I guess, win-win-win. It
Right.
could benefit the Bills, the other team, and Kyer himself. So we'll see, because his value, if he's not playing, is only going to go down from here.
Yeah, and there are holes. You know, I'll get to the offensive line with you in a little bit, but we'll stay on defense, middle linebacker, that other position, and Terrell Bernard in the mix during camp, but gets injured, John. But now we see he's working his way back, full pads, doing work, not doing anything team-wise or position-wise yet, but in full pads.
Yeah, didn't practice again on, what's today, Thursday, going into the game on Saturday. So I don't know if we'll see Terrell Bernard, but I don't know if you have to. His place in this is very interesting. He may have actually elevated his resume to win this job simply by not playing and allowing the other guys to play. It also could just be something of, all right, let's try to work him in the week of the Jets game and see if it works, or maybe they roll with Dodson or Klein week 1.
Yeah.
And Bernard can either sub in or they make that transition after that game. But right now it's Tyrell Dodson, and AJ Klein, and I don't know if either of those options are all that inspiring.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and that's the point we're at with that position right now, John. Dorian Williams, we know he's been at the other linebacker position, but he's been pretty impressive, but now he's banged up too as we go into the final preseason game.
Right, and if prior to the injury they weren't going to give him run again at the middle linebacker spot. It seems this is the path they've chosen, at least for this season. Remember, Terrell Bernard played exclusively outside last season and now is in the mix for middle.
Mm-hmm.
So there's maybe a potential, all right, let's see what we got from this crop this year. And once Dorian Williams has a grasp on the defense, we can maybe try to see if he can have the flexibility or maybe focus fully at the middle spot if they're not satisfied with what they get there this season. But right now, my betting odds would be on Dodson or Klein, and honestly, I think it's a coin flip.
Yeah, I agree with you. I still think you go with A.J. Klein to start just because of his experience and where he's at. But again, you had Dodson come in for Tremaine Edmonds last year when he was out, and that's still something that is up in the air, and I don't think, it's not good when you look at that position, when you can't. I'm not bagging on A.J. Klein, but I never thought when A.J. Klein was here he'd ever be a starter, but with his
I didn't even reference him when we discussed the position battle off the top. He was an afterthought.
Right.
And injuries will push him up, but also just the play.
Right.
So it's an interesting spot to be in, and I think of any of the places of where the roster currently sits, heading down the home stretch of cuts, the fan base is really pushing the heat on Brandon Beane for the way he addressed this offseason.
Yeah, and the fan base might be right on this one because right now you're looking at a team that when you go, well, if player X steps up, if player Y steps up, we're good to go come the opener. Well, we're not far away from the opener, and at that position, not good to go as you and I sit here right now. The other big three position battles we talked about was Osiris Torrance going to be able to overcome Bates and get into that starting lineup? I think Osiris Torrance has done enough, in my eyes, to be heavy in that conversation come following the preseason game in Chicago.
I said after the preseason game in Pittsburgh, the conversation was over. Osiris Torrance is the Bills' starting right guard. Sean McDermott can say it remains open because that's what he does. But Osiris Torrance has started the first two preseason games after seeing the lion's share of the reps at right guard when we were up at St. John Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
And he hasn't done anything in those games that makes you say, well, he can't do it. And Ryan Bates hasn't even played guard. He's played center when he gets into the preseason games. So to me, it's not even a question right now. Osiris Torrance is the Bills' right guard, and now it's more so what do they do with Ryan Bates? Is he simply the center, the backup center to Mitch Morse, or what do they do should Connor McGovern's injury be more long-term, and do they play Bates at left guard, or do they keep him as like their interior swing guy and elevate someone like David Edwards?
That's Bates' curse maybe right there, is that he can play at multiple positions. So if you're trying to come up with a starting lineup, but you want to have a safety net, you have Bates right there to step in at center or the other positions.
Someone told me this about a job at my place and standing at a station early in my television career. I was not on air. I was a photographer for news, but I also could edit. I could shoot with the camera. I could run a live truck. I could produce a show. I could do everything. But I wanted to do none of it. I wanted to be on air as a reporter. And the reporter I was working with said, the problem for you is you do everything too well, that you're too valuable to them. If you are no longer this ultimate utility guy, then they have to find someone specifically to be a producer, to be a photographer, to be an editor.
So you're the guy who ruined this industry because you could do everything so well.
Right, but it's the funny thing because they tell you, and they say it in football, the more things you can do, the longer career you can have.
Mm-hmm.
The more things you can do, the more valuable you are, the easier it is to get a job. But are you going to get the job that you want? And maybe that's what this has happened to Ryan Bates is he good enough to start? Was he okay, fine last year? Sure. But is he just more valuable to be the guy that, Connor McGovern goes down, or Osiris Torrance goes down, or Mitch Morse goes down. Well, we know who's going to go play.
Right.
It's Ryan Bates, and I think that paired with Osiris Torrance, without a doubt, showing that he can more than handle his way as a rookie to start on this offensive line. I think those two things paired with each other have made this a conversation that is over and out.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. John, Spencer Brown's play so far this year, he seems to me to be a polarizing guy on the offensive line. You know, a lot of talk was the Bills upgraded the offensive line during the offseason, especially when you talk about Connor McGovern. You still have Spencer Brown. What have you thought about Spencer Brown so far this year?
Sean McDermott says it, and it's one of the few coach speak things that I agree with. It's really hard to evaluate the play in the trenches and in the offensive line by the eye test on a broadcast or live action. It's just hard to do that unless it is absolutely glaring, which some of the moments for Spencer Brown have been absolutely glaring. He obviously had a rough stretch with 2 penalties in 3 plays in the Pittsburgh game. I don't think it's been great, but I don't think they, are anywhere close to being concerned per se about it. They also have no other options. And I think if we talk about middle linebacker being a position where the fans are pushing heat on Bean for the way he handled stacking that up for them to succeed, I think the tackle position is maybe the next in line here of what people take issue with, of not having a solid backup plan should things for Spencer Brown not go the way that people feel that they should. And Tommy Doyle's injury is incredibly unfortunate. He was not the answer should Spencer Brown not be the guy.
Right.
You saw what David Quessenberry was. They decided to bring him back. I didn't necessarily think that he was someone that you'd feel comfortable with. If Spencer Brown's not it, let's put in David Quessenberry. I don't think anybody would sign up for that. So they just didn't stack up the depth behind Spencer Brown, and even, frankly, God forbid something happens to Deion Dawkins. Like, I just don't think they solidified. They had names, but they didn't have names behind them. And
Does something else need to be done?
That could be another position where they make a move. Now, I think you would trade Kaiir Elam for a right tackle? No, I don't think they're there. Or I don't think you'd probably try to get a right tackle that would legitimately push Spencer Brown. I just don't know if that's reasonable per se, or a value that they would feel is even enough. But I think addressing or finding another tackle would probably be a good thing. And that doesn't mean to start over Spencer Brown, but just to give you a little more insurance should something go wrong.
Defensive line. Jordan Phillips still working his way back. We talked about the defensive line. There are battles there to make the roster. Jordan Phillips, with what he has on tape already, I mean, where's he progressing and where do we stand with him? Because it seems like the team's still really high on him and want him to be a part of this.
Defensive line coach Eric Washington said this week, when he is healthy, Jordan Phillips is dominating. He said, and I agree with him, that's why I did a story after the Rams game in the opener last year, he was dominating. We know what the Rams ultimately became last year, but still, when he was healthy last year early, and when that offensive or defensive line was healthy early, they got after it. They looked really good. I remember the first couple of weeks of the season, Vaughn was playing well. Jordan Phillips has come back. You're like, wow, these guys are humming. This is the four-man pass rush that they had envisioned. So it's a weird thing. I'm looking, and we'll get to roster bubble guys after this, but I have the roster card here, defensive tackles. There are 9 of them on the Bills roster. There's only 2 guys that I can say right now 100% are going to make the Bills, and that is Daquan Jones and Ed Oliver at the defensive tackle position.
Yeah.
There are 5 guys in total, so there are 3 more, and it is Tim Settle, Poona Ford, and Jordan Phillips that I think are in the mix. I just don't foresee them keeping 5 defensive tackles. I just don't. They've never done it, to my knowledge, and so that would leave you 4.
Right.
And I have no idea which way you would go. If Jordan Phillips is healthy, I think they keep him. Tim Settle was the one that I said between Phillips and Settle when we did like a potential surprising cuts before camp started. I put those 2 kind of on the same line, but Settle's gotten high praise this offseason and through training camp. And I think Poona Ford's been good.
Yeah.
And that's a guy they brought in who's a little more of like a stout. Yeah, he shows some athleticism, but he's more of a stout. Like
you
gap
notice
filler.
him during the preseason games for sure.
So I think they got 5 guys on the interior for 4 spots. Now maybe they would roll with 5, but I just don't see it. So I don't know. That's a really intriguing spot that I just don't know. And in terms of like a trade, they're all on 1-year deals. So you're not going to really trade anything. They're not particularly young players. And I don't think any of those guys find their way into the practice squad. So it's an interesting logjam. It's a good problem to have. But this one, I don't know how to handicap and stack up Jordan Phillips, Tim Settle, and Poona Ford. I would lean towards Ford being maybe on the good side of it, but I legitimately don't know between those 3.
Tough decision right there to be made after the preseason game and the cutdown day coming up next Tuesday, John. You mentioned positions that are filled and congested and whatnot. We'll go to the roster bubble guys, John. And I'm looking at wide receiver. Is this a time where the Bills will keep, say, 7 wide receivers because of what they have right now in that congested room? And, of course, Andy Isabella turned some heads a few weeks ago. You talked to him last week before the game. But then you have guys you brought in. You have Khalil Shakir, who's now dealing with an injury. Deontay Hardy, Shorter. And then the guys who have been playing late in preseason games have done a good job.
4 guys are definitely making it, and it's Diggs, Davis, Hardy, and Sherfield.
Yeah.
Then I think it's 3 guys for 2 spots. I think it's Shakir, Isabella, and Shorter. And the conversation goes, all right, Justin Shorter plays special teams. He's a bigger, different body than anyone else they have in that room. And while you could counter that and say, but if he's never going to be in the offensive mix, why does it matter if he brings a different element as a wide receiver to the room? But I just think pairing special teams with that, think of Jay Kumaro. He had a little different size and measurables than the rest of the group, and he was the guy that found his way into the roster. To me, Shakir and Isabella kind of bring the same thing. They're both return guys. They're both slot guys. Like, that's what they are. What's going to be interesting is, what is the status of Khalil Shakir and his injury? Because he hasn't practiced all week. I don't think he's going to play in the game. If they put him on IR, he's out for the year. It doesn't appear that that's where this is, but there's some weird things that happen around this time of year.
Exactly.
And if they want to put him on IR after roster cuts, they'd have to put him on the active roster and let somebody go.
Mm-hmm.
I think Isabella has been better than Khalil Shakir. I just think if we're going apples to apples, what the eye test has said, he's been better this preseason. He's been better in training camp. But I don't know if it matters. I just always go back to the draft pick. It's only going to be his 2nd season. He's not even in his 2nd season, Khalil Shakir. Would they give up on someone who showed flashes that soon for a guy you just brought in off the street who, yes, he was a 2nd-round pick, and yes, he's a speedster, and yes, he's looked good.
Does the fact that he's very comparable to Deontay Hardy when you have what you have as far as size and speed goes, as far as playing in that slot, should something happen to Hardy, I'm just saying as far as Josh Allen being the passer, his sight line towards that position and what you have there with speed-wise. Just throwing it out there. Just popped into my head.
I don't. There's also this, and with any of these decisions, I think there's also part of this, does Brandon Beane weighs the gamble of who can I get on the practice squad? Who can we let go that won't get picked up by another team? And who's more likely? I think if you let go of Khalil Shakir, he's more likely to get picked up than an Andy Isabella, who's been available for other teams.
Fair enough.
And I'm not sure, as we go into the final preseason game, even if Shakir played, I'm not sure the performance of Khalil Shakir, Andy Isabella, or Justin Shorter matters at all at this point in terms of their standing on the roster.
Okay, Kingsley Jonathan. I only bring this up because it was brought up this week during practices or during the week of practice. His shot at actually making the 53-man roster this year.
It's all contingent on whatever they do with Von Miller. And that's the same for a lot of guys.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're like, are they keeping 7 receivers? Or not if Von Miller's on the active roster at all. I mean, even if he is playing. If Von Miller goes on PUP, which it appears we're probably trending that direction, and he stays on PUP out the first 4 games, doesn't count on the roster, it opens up a spot.
So can we pump the brakes on Von Miller in a helmet and his lower gear starting to work out at this point now that, I go back to your Trey White video from a year ago running with the parachute. Everyone thought he'd be good to go week 1. Now you have Von Miller with his actual helmet on out there practicing, and you have the Bills Mafia all like, Von's going to be good to go. He's got his helmet on. We got a couple of weeks to get up to speed and be ready to go on opening night.
And similar to Trey, and I'm not saying they're in the same spots or whatever in terms of their timeline to return, but Trey, we saw some things at Fisher early that made it seem like he was at a certain place, and then you didn't see them again. And the same thing I think has happened to Von. Now, maybe it's simply because the space at One Bills Drive is different than the space at St. John Fisher, and there were 2 full fields and all these places and stuff like that. Maybe he's just doing some of the same things, but either when we're not there or inside or whatever. But I don't think it necessarily means he's at a setback or anything's wrong. To me, it was always a long shot. Von's super positive attitude and the way he talks about everything, I think, paired with what you saw, made you think, okay, maybe week 1 is possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think similar to how the Bills knew for a while that he was going to start camp on PUP and Von was hoping not to, I think the Bills maybe have known for a while he's going to stay on PUP to start the regular season, and that's just the smart slow play. And again, it gives them incredible roster flexibility should they want to keep a guy like Kingsley Jonathan, who looked good in preseason action. He's had moments last season with the team, being on the practice squad and getting elevated here. Shane Ray goes on IR after the Steelers game. That's another name that was kind of a hot topic of, could this guy find his way onto the roster? And you talk about guys that I'm like, I know they're going to make the team. Greg Rousseau, Leonard Floyd, and I'm going to put A.J. Epinesa in that group. I think those three are for sure going to make it before we go into the preseason game. I think they keep at least 5 defensive ends. So that leaves 2 spots for Boogie Basham, Shaq Lawson, Kingsley Jonathan, if they don't have Von Miller on the active roster. So that would probably leave one of those guys out. I think it's a long shot for Jonathan. The only way would maybe be if Basham's another guy that in like the Kaiir Elam realm, you can get some value for.
Okay, give me a surprise that we're going to get. Either a cut, someone makes the roster, a move, or something.
You don't want to save this for next week?
What, after the game?
Yeah.
Okay, we can save it for after the game. If that's what you want. If you want.
Well, I'm just saying a lot of things could happen in the game. People could get hurt. We could see something that kind of tips the scale. You get an idea of if they're playing the starters, who's going out there and seeing more time. That'll give you one more final look-see to see maybe where the team is at. I can tell you who I think this next game actually does matter the most for. We can do things like that. I think we've named some of them. I'll go through. I think offensive line is incredibly intriguing. I think guys like Ike Bucker, I mean, he's been like running with the third team in preseason games. It's kind of peculiar to me, and he's an interior guy where they seem to be kind of set on the interior. Can he find a way on there? What about Greg Manns? He's a guy who was dealing with injuries that they brought back, was with them a year ago. Alec Anderson's a young guy that I think they like. He's played well. So kind of that second line, second grouping to figure out the depth for them. I think we named the wide receivers. Tight end is set. edge, Kingsley Jonathan is I think, a good name, a guy to watch. I think the interior to see kind of that rotation.
Can I just say Reggie Gilliam? I don't know why he's on the team. We've talked about it before.
So they don't ever use a fullback?
I don't know. You watch the team. Why have Dawson Knox come in? Have someone else come in?
They don't do what Reggie Gilliam does. Also, this is a perfect thing for you to do. And I'll bring it up again when we go through the roster after the game on Saturday. Special teams matters. This team values it so greatly. And he is a core special teamer.
I get it.
Do you get it? Because clearly not. You said he should not be on the team.
All right, I don't get it, John. I just and I know, didn't he speak to the media this week?
Yeah, he ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, I know he's not.
He's not going anywhere.
As soon as he spoke to the media, I'm like, well, I was wrong on that one there.
Linebacker's also an interesting one. And this will come down to the status of Dorian Williams and Terrell Bernard. But you talk about special teams mattering. I don't know. I have a really hard time finding a path for Tyler Medikevich to make this team. He's battled some injuries, and I know he's a special teams guy, and they brought him back in free agency. But I think if Dorian Williams, Terrell Bernard, Tyrell Dotson, Matt Milano, there's 4 for sure.
Yeah.
You'd probably think A.J. Klein at this point is a pretty solid bet to make the team. So then it's between Medikevich and Balin Spector. I think you're going with Balin Spector.
I'm going to agree with you on that. Tyler Medikevich, I don't see a spot for him on this roster.
So that's kind of the way my mind is looking, is going into the final preseason game. Offense, defense, you don't have to look great. Just don't look like crap. Just
right.
don't look like you did in Pittsburgh. Just look marginally at best. At worst. At worst, look marginally better. And then I kind of have an eye on who is stacking up and rotating with the first team, but even more so who's with the second team, because those are the guys that are really going to be on the fringe.
Right. Trip to Chicago, a lot nicer than your last trip to Chicago. We can all agree on that during the freeze. What was it, like negative 10 degrees on the field when you guys were there before Christmas?
It's been amazing. 2 years ago, preseason, Casey McCabe is the photographer that's coming with me. We went to a Cubs game with a bunch of media people the day before the game. It was legit 95 degrees. Then we go last year around Christmas time, and the temperature is sub-zero. The wind chill is like minus 30. Thankfully, it's like low 70s.
And John is nice and warm in the press box either way, or cool in the press box. John, 3 and out as we'll take a look at some of the other things going on around the league. Jonathan Taylor, the Colts are saying he can seek a trade at this point. Where is he for week 1?
Before I address that, I just want to let our listeners know, and too bad we don't put our rundown on YouTube now that we are on YouTube, because you spelled Jonathan, Johnathan.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Oh, I'm looking at Kingsley Jonathan.
And as a Jonathan, that insults me.
With no H, nonetheless.
That's not how you spell Jonathan.
I know it's not. Go up the rundown and look at Kingsley Jonathan.
Well, apparently you don't. Because
I'm sorry, Mr. Perfect.
You're welcome.
I can't make a mistake.
Now that we are on YouTube, I wanted to put these rundowns so everyone could enjoy your heinous spelling errors.
Yeah, I'm sure Matt and Jordan will enjoy putting that together while we're
all right, Jonathan Taylor, I think he's with the Colts. I just, who's going to give up a first-round pick?
Right.
Who's going to pay him? What are the stars that need to align for Jonathan Taylor to be somewhere else?
And the Colts saying he's not worth it, but this is what we want for him. So,
and thank God you didn't put this in should the Bills go for him. I've listened enough to that idiocy.
My surprise thing at the end of this, John, was going to be for us to just come up with some outlandish thing to say to see if we can go viral by saying something stupid. Like all these other national guys who act like they know what's going on around. Like half of this stuff with people talking about the Bills is like me talking about the Miami Heat right now. I know nothing about the NBA, nor do I care, nor should I even be talking about it. We'll get to that in a bit. Trey Lance, John, the situation out there with the 49ers. What's your thoughts on it, and what do you think happens there? I think I saw that the 49ers are saying he's staying put.
I appreciate the effort initially. Go all in for your quarterback. They didn't feel Jimmy G was the guy that could take them over the top. He could take them to a certain point that was good and far, but he was not the long-term solution that could win them a Super Bowl. I applaud that aggressive effort. I also applaud not just sticking to Trey Lance simply because you put in all of that effort, you wagered all of this on him, and it didn't work out. I respect that. But it was a huge blunder. I mean, to give up that sort of draft capital and for it to be a miss, and a miss largely because you never gave him the opportunity.
Right.
I'm not saying Trey Lance was going to be good, but as Josh Allen proved, and he's going to be the outlier that everybody always points to, but you got to give these guys an opportunity. And it's probably over for him. I mean, these guys, what are the stories that you've seen in the history where guys get kind of discarded like this early in their career and it ultimately pans out? He needs to go to a place where he can play, low expectations. I don't really – I've seen people say like Minnesota, like, all right, let Kirk Cousins do this year and then give him the keys to the car.
We have a lot of Bills Mafia guys right out the door right there. This scenario was thrown at me. The Bills need to go get Trey Lance because should be the Bills' backup because he's best suited to play like Josh Allen should Josh Allen get injured.
I know you're saying this because you know what I think of the...
my reaction was my reaction right now. I just started laughing. I'm like, how do you even arrive at that? Like, how?
Because don't you know what these people think?
So, okay, you don't need to answer that, John.
I think I just did.
And we won't go into outlandish made-up sports stories that we could go throw out there at the wall, John. But
it's been a rough week, man, for that.
Oh my God! Like even I, who really, I can't tell you the last time I watched ESPN. I got to be honest with you. Other than like a football game that's on there, at all. The Stephen Smith thing is I think he's done that before.
Did you call him Stephen Smith? I don't think he's been referred to as Stephen Smith ever.
Well, that's how much I care, right there.
Stephen A.
And then I don't even know who the other ones were.
Well,
but
Nick Wright is a moron, and he's a Chiefs homer, and he has a horrible haircut. Even if I could grow hair like that, never in my life would I think that would be a good idea. He also said Roger Saffold was one of the Bills' best offensive linemen, and that Tommy Doyle was their top backup at tackle. Like, imagine living in a world and having a job where you're paid well, very, very well and handsomely, to just throw crap against the wall and have no repercussions of when it sticks but shouldn't.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's what the podcast is going to turn into, folks. Make sure you tune in.
Yep, that's right. That's where we'll be slowly transitioning into gotcha moments and things that will go viral and get people talking about John and I across the country and how dumb we are, although John already does that to me. So we will come your way again on Saturday following the Bills-Bears preseason game number 3. We'll go through what we saw from the preseason game and then move forward to what's coming up and what our thoughts are with Cutdown Day coming up on Tuesday. Until then, have a good weekend, everybody. Enjoy the preseason game on Saturday, and thanks for joining us.